wanted more money. And Max didn't exactly throw money around. I mean, I witnessed a time when they asked him for a pencil sharpener to sharpen their pencils, and Max suggested getting a razor blade. So they went on strike. And because I'd been raised in a union family, I've been always told not to cross picket lines. So I withheld my column. And the Berkeley tribe didn't like this. They started their own paper, and they wanted me to join it. But, you know, I felt I owed a lot to Max, and I would not do that. During that time, I was approached by the San Francisco Chronicle, by Stanley Arnold, who was then the editor of the Combined Examiner Chronicle. And he asked if I would take my column to the Chronicle. And that was an offer I could not refuse. So I did that. And the Chronicle announced it. They had this section, Great Moments in Medicine, you know, and they had the previous one discovering the properties of chloroform. And then they announced August 10th, my column would begin there. And this is the way I appeared in the Chronicle. Now, this is from the AMA News, a favorable article about me, and I thought, where have I gone wrong? I've never been a member of the AMA. This is from a Rolling Stone story when waterbeds first became popular. And the film in this shot was in Berkeley, a place called Williams College, which is off the Arlington. It used to be an old college, but they lost their accreditation because they were doing courses in reincarnation, things like that. The owner of the property used to speak with aliens. So there I am, holding a stethoscope to the waterbed. Strangely enough, last Sunday, a woman approached me, and to me she seemed, a little elderly woman approached me, and she said, "You know, I'm in that photograph, and she's the one holding that little roach." It was just very strange, that she would approach me. I knew I had this amongst my photos I was going to talk about. The photo was done by Robert Altman, the photographer, not the filmmaker. Robert has he has a book about the 60s. So here's Tim Leary. Tim Leary was living in Berkeley at the time, on Queens Road, and he had a big deck with a stunning view looking out through the Golden Gate. And often I would be up there, and Max would be there too. And one day, this was after I'd started the column in the Barb, one day I learned from Max that he had a sister who lived in Miami Beach. And it turned out that my parents were acquainted with Max's sister. And I thought, kind of ironic, because at that time in the Berkeley Barb, there would be articles, people would submit, "Kill the pigs," "Off the police." And at that same time, Max had a nephew who was a policeman on the Miami Beach police force. So I became a doctor for Tim and his wife Rosemary and Susan and Jack, his children. But later, after Tim was captured, I'd spent some time with Tim and Rosemary in Switzerland when they were exiled, And after, he had escaped from prison and then escaped from Eldridge Cleaver in Algeria. But then it turned out that he was thinking on his friends. He thought he would never get out of jail, and he didn't think it was fair. And it was true, he was just in jail for something like an ounce of marijuana. There was a press conference that was held. Jerry Rubin was there, Allen Ginsberg, Ram Dass, and I thought to myself, and this was before I learned that he was thinking, I thought, well, this is a kangaroo court. So I rented a kangaroo costume, and when they were doing this press conference at the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco, the kangaroo hopped out onto the stage. And Ken Kelly, Ken had been an editor of the Berkeley Barb. He didn't know who he was. He grabbed the head, and it came off exposing me. And there was a big gasp from the crowd. Well, I felt I had to distance myself from Tim after that. I couldn't, it was hard to believe that he would rat on his friends. He did. He did it. There are people who say, oh no, he didn't really do it. He did. I was at Altamont and helped write the Rolling Stone article about Altamont. Yes. Yes, Heather. I hear my daughter there. Where was I? I got distracted. Oh, okay. There are 2 books in progress right now about Altamont. One is by Joel Selvin, and there's another book. So next year, I think there will be 2 books about the Altamont rock concert, which was just a disaster. It was 5 years after that before I would attend a large musical event. Oh, well, it just flashed by. I'm not going to try to go back.
What was that?
It was an ad that KSAN. Around that time, I was asked to do programs at KSAN. At first, I was a guest on KMPX, and Howard Hessman was the DJ. He was the first DJ that I worked with. And Howard Hessman went on to become the Johnny Fever of the fictional show WKRP in Cincinnati. Well, he had been a disc jockey before, and he was my first disc jockey as someone to work with me. Country Joe wrote this song, Dr. Hip, and we used to use that to introduce the radio program. The radio program was very popular, but one time I had Margot St. James as a guest. And just before she went on to my show, she was on, well, she wasn't on. Paul Krasner was doing a show. And she playfully, and she was a good friend of Paul's, she went into the studio where Paul was doing his show and unzipped his trousers. The top of his trousers were held together apparently by a safety pin. She had some difficulty. And Paul was reading memos that had been purloined from Rolling Stone, something to how to increase the ads. And later, listening to it, and to a tape later, tape which supposedly disappeared, you could hear Paul gasp every now and then. Well, but then she was a guest on my show, and of course, the topic turned to oral sex, because that's what was happening with her and Paul. There was a couple in the peninsula who were listening to the show, and they complained to the FCC, because even though I always used anatomical terms, Margot did not. For example, she said, well, I do find it easier to lick pussy than to suck cock. So Metro Media then spent about $250,000 trying to save the station's license. And once that was cleared up, then I was cleared from the station. Peter Laufer had a book about talk radio. One of the chapters was about that radio program. And this article, I think, was in Penthouse. It was an excerpt from Peter's book. Peter was supposed to come yesterday. Well, in 1973, I had just had it with the column. I was carrying letters around wherever I went. I was out of the country, every place I had letters, and a weekly column comes by very quickly. And I paid attention to every single word, because by then, I realized that people were relying on my advice. But I finally decided to stop. But as you see, I still had a good relationship with the Berkeley Barb, because this 4 years after I left, they still would do articles about me.
Do you want to have time for questions?
Yeah, I'll try to.
We only have 5 minutes left.
Oh, okay. I'll try to wrap this up. All right. So I put the column. And this was a story in the Pacific Sun. That's you see me in the photo with the Sun publisher and Alan Watts. And the reason I put that in, and this is Pigpen, the reason I chose these photos is because of all the drugs, alcohol is surely the worst. If not the worst, one of the worst. Pigpen died, from the Grateful Dead, he was 27 years old. Alan Watts died of alcoholism. He was 58 years old. Hunter Thompson had an alcohol problem, aside from the drugs. He was also an alcoholic. And Greg Hemingway. Let's see. Try to, if only this won't do this. We almost had David Crosby, who was a friend, and he was a patient. And he's still touring. It's miraculous. Hunter Thompson was a friend for many years, and sometimes a patient. Last time I saw him, he had broken his leg in Hawaii, and I helped his wife get him from the hospital. And this Hunter autographed a book here. And when I last saw him, I said, Hunter, this is the first time I've ever seen you stoned on legally prescribed drugs. So he laughed. This has to do with, now I do a lot of work with lawyers. This has to do with an episode with Johnny Cochran where he'd given a talk. And I knew that after these talks, the guests, the people in the audience could go up and have a picture taken with him. So beneath the name tag that had been given, I'd written this, OJ did it. And when Johnny Cochran turned to the camera, I slipped out the OJ did it, and Paul Krasner used this for the realist. So I continue to work with lawyers like Barry Melton. I'm currently working on a case with Barry Melton at this very moment. Can't. That was Tony Serra. I've often worked with Tony Serra. This has to do with, I was asked to review the Phil Hartman death. And then his brother, one of his brothers, asked me to spread his ashes under the Golden Gate Bridge. I still like pranks. This was a Last Supper replica when Ed Rosenthal was about to be sentenced, and we didn't know what kind of sentence he would receive. So we have here Will Durst, Barry Melton, Eric Christensen. I'm there to, on the right or left, wearing a red shroud. Merle Sanders, Wavy Gravy, Larry Bryant, and Herb Gold. Now, if the Berkeley Barb existed today, I don't think they would fear running cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. This drawing is the winner of the Draw Muhammad contest in Texas. And it's not as offensive as some of the others, but you can see, you can't draw me. And then you see at the bottom the artist's hand. That's why I draw you. That's exactly the point. So I think if Max were alive today and the Barb were alive, they would be covering things like the new prohibitions on speech. We need a new free speech movement in Berkeley. The Berkeley campus, dictates what kind of speech is allowed, what kind of topics are allowed. They speak of something called microaggressions. So if a professor wanted to bring up the topic, for example, of affirmative action, say, oh no, that might, even discussing that might offend someone. So I think the Barb, would have printed cartoons and would be covering the restrictions on free speech now. But, coming to the last one here. I think that Max Scheer would have been in favor of removing Confederate flags.
As you all know, we are a little bit over our schedule, but if we can do some very quick questions, a few of them, and then I'm going to push you out the door because we're behind schedule. But does anybody have a quick question? Steve Ann.
Are you working on an autobiography, memoir? Because I'd love to read all of these things again.
Oh, every now and then I'll make some notes, but not in earnest. I think I should do it soon.
Yes, sir.
Do you think the government had anything to do with propagating and developing the AIDS virus and other
I mean, I've heard that theory before, but
because it totally killed the sexual revolution.
yeah. But it's possible. There are strange things that are possible. I haven't seen any firm evidence for that.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Do you think Tim Leary was working for the CIA?
No, but he was cooperating with the DEA and the FBI. He had given his last, the perfect love, Joanna Harcourt Smith, a list of men that she was allowed to have sex with in order to help him.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the Kennedys was on that list. It was, he was very much self-centered and, wanted to do whatever he could to get out of prison. He hated his lawyers. So the first person he think on was a lawyer who brought him some hashish in prison.
That might be the only person he ever did.
Maybe, but... Whoop. But isn't that enough?
Any other quick questions? No? I'm gonna then remind you, tomorrow is the film festival over at the Media Center. Doors open at 1, the movies start, the shorts at 1:30. There's a break for dinner, I think around 4 to 5. And then we are going to be doing Berkeley in the 60s. Although somebody found a parking ticket from next door, somebody who parked about 2:30. So if you cannot find your parking ticket, I might have it.